The Women of Ill Repute, with your hosts, Wendy Mesley and Maureen Holloway.
So, hey, Maureen, I've been thinking that, you and I were sort of, quasi-famous, maybe, what I like to call Canadian famous, but other people, they're like really like famous.
Wait, we're very famous. I'm on TikTok now. I have 3 followers, and you're doing really well on Instagram with your 27. So, fame is relative.
Well, it might be 28 now. More seriously, you rock on Instagram. I got a bunch of followers on Twitter, but we're still not like really like famous.
What is famous? Like, is that even a thing?
Well, I don't know. To me, it's kind of like movie stars and singers and all that stuff. And there's lots of famous people there. But it seems what matters now is almost more how many followers you have on social. Like Kim Kardashian is the new famous. And she's got a million, bazillion, whatever followers and makes $1 bazillion. That's famous.
And we're not even really sure why. That's the thing. Like Kylie Jenner, one of her sisters, has 300 million followers on Instagram. And for the life of me, I'm not really sure why. I mean, she's beautiful, but that can't be enough.
Well, I think it's the famous boyfriends. It's like Kim Kardashian married Kanye and then...
Well, but she was famous before that.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. So you need a sex tape. Or was that not her? I can't remember. Doesn't it always start with a sex tape?
I have never had any desire to capture an image or in that relationship. The answer is no. I'm not wearing Marilyn Monroe's dress, the naked dress, or whatever the one she wore to the Met Gala. So
you could pull that off.
No, I could not. You could pull it off. Anyway, back to fame.
Yes, I have Cher.
What?
No, I mean, at the beginning when I was talking you into doing this podcast, I was saying we're going to get Cher, we're going to get Sharon Stone and Fonda and all those people, but actually, they don't just magically show up. So the only famous person that I actually know that I can actually like visit or send an email to or phone or whatever, she's one of my oldest, bestest pals.
This is what happens when you bring in another, like you're triangulating. So she's bester than me.
Well, I've known her since grade 9. It's like you're one of my best friends, but I have known her since grade 9. And you and I, we only became pals a couple of years ago.
Okay, fine. I'll accept that. And she's more famous than both of us. So come on, who is it?
Yeah. So her name is Louise Penny. She has millions of followers.
Louise Penny.
So yeah, I guess it goes back. We were in grade 9 together and 10. Kind of a long story. I guess we'll get into that. But now she's like a world famous author. She's written 18 murder mysteries, the Chief Inspector Gamache series. It's been turned into a Prime Video series with Alfred Molina, kind of a big deal. It's airing December 2nd, about the same time as the launch of her latest book. And December 2nd is also the day she's going to be at Indigo in Toronto. Oh, and she wrote another murder mystery with that other famous person, who is also, Maureen, I'm sure is dying to come on our podcast, Hillary Clinton. So yeah.
Okay. All right. Louise Penny. I love her already. Let's bring that bitch on.
Hey, Louise.
Hi. Now, Wendy, who's this other woman who's with you? Like, what the hell is that? You're just a placeholder for me, right?
She's my other best friend.
Hey, Maureen.
Hi, Louise. I know a lot about you. I want to start with, and I give Wendy a hard time about this all the time, that you guys were synchronized swimmers together.
Oh, my God. You know what? I had almost forgotten that. Oh, my God. Do you remember sitting in your home, lying on the floor, trying to work out where our legs would go and to the music? And we chose music. I think the theme was Broadway, and we decided to choose something completely different.
Was Pink Panther? Well, there was 2. There was one, the guy that was constipated on the toilet. What's his name? Heartbreak Hotel. There was that one, and there was the Pink Panther one.
Elvis Presley? You can't remember Elvis Presley's name?
Yeah, Elvis Presley, that guy. I remember the song, though, Maureen. It's pretty good.
I also know that this blows my mind. I mean, you had all sorts of adventures together, but I think you were 15 and the two of you went on like a 200 or 500 kilometer bike ride where you slept on the side of the road.
As you said, Wendy came over for dinner. We had dinner together not that long ago. And it seemed like Like, not only what were we thinking, but we were 15. What do 15-year-olds think? Well, how could our parents have let us go? What were our mothers thinking?
Your mothers.
Yeah, how many children did they start with?
There's a murder mystery. There were 6 and then? No, there were 5 of us, and we had pots and tents and everything on the back of our, I think we had like 3 gears. And we rode past Huntsville from Toronto. It was 60 miles, because that was before kilometers, because that's how old we are. 60 miles a day. And we slept on the side of the road, and we had like bathing suits and running shoes. And yeah, like, come molest us. Here we are. Our mothers were crazy.
Yeah, exactly. Can you imagine their faces when we actually came back?
I'm picturing these 2 girls, these 2 teenage girls. And I mean, so you've got your synchronized swimming, but that wasn't going to be the thing that lifted you up into fame. Did either of you recognize any singular talent in the other at the time?
Now, that's an interesting question. Because, the fact is, and it doesn't take much to, Wendy, that, she's remarkable. And you were remarkable, Wendy, from the get-go. Smart, and bright, luminous young woman. And beautiful and clever and popular. And so, no, she had sort of everything going for her. And, it always amazed me because I felt like I was tall and clunky and, had braces, and I was just amazed that this woman would even talk to me, never mind, take me on a killer trip and hope that I died by the roadside.
I'm like, we'll get into how we sort of fell apart later, but I remember sitting by the phone. I used to think you lived in a mansion in this magical world with family and rich people, and I used to sit and wait by the phone for you to call. And then I read something the other day that said that, when you were bad, your mother would make you go out and play. Because you like to sit in a room and read. So, I mean, there was stuff going on in your family and there was stuff between us. But yeah, anyway.
I remember I used to love visiting your home and your grandfather. I adored your grandfather.
He was very charismatic. He was an asshole, though. He was but, he loved me.
One of the things I remember, and I'm not sure that, if anyone's eating, you might want to stop right now. But for some reason, again, what sticks in the mind of a teenager is you describing having to pop the pimples on his back. You remember that?
No, I don't remember that.
Oh, my God.
I remember because I just think, God, I hope she's in the will. I mean, for that.
He left me $2,000. There's not a lot of money in my family, but it was great when I was 17. But you weren't writing then? Because I knew you were super smart and stuff.
You know what? Thank you for saying that. I struggled to get C's in school. I was not, and I'm still not. I'm an autodidact. I love to read. I love to learn, but I don't do well in a school setting. And I've become a big believer that the classroom isn't necessarily the best place to judge how smart, how bright, what kind of future a child is going to have. And it might be the only paradigm we have, but it certainly didn't work well for me. My mother never got a report card that said, Louise would do better if she worked harder. No, that, it's like the poor child. She's working flat out, and she's getting C's. But what was your question?
Well, the question was, writers, and anybody who writes is a writer, whether they're paid for it or not. I've always had the feeling that it's something you have to do. It's a compulsion as much as anything.
Writers are readers to begin with, of course. So I was a voracious reader. Partly because of what Wendy just said. I was just such a fearful child. I only felt safe when I was in my bedroom with the door closed, reading. And I hated to leave. And it's still my favorite place. My feet up on the bed reading. My husband used to call me a horizontalist. The whole day trying to get my feet up on something.
He died a couple of years ago. You guys he was so supportive of you and he supported you before you were famous or even famous.
He was the only one who didn't mock me. And mocking comes in many forms, as you know. It's often not the wah, wah, wah. It's often just the roll of the eye. It's the, the sly aside. It's, hearing whispers from third parties. Oh, well, of course she's writing a book, but it'll never be published. But Michael always believed in me, even when I suffered 5 years of writer's block. And although it did get to the stage where he stopped asking me how the book was going, This is akin, Wendy, to my mother when she stopped asking me at the age of 35 whether I'd met any nice young men. You know you're in trouble when your mother stops asking that. She's just given up. So Michael stopped asking how the book was going. Not that he didn't believe I could write it. I think he just didn't want, it was already painful enough. So I was watching Oprah and eating bonbons.
And then you made him the focus. He's like Inspector Gamache, right?
He became the inspiration. It was, I don't want to say unintentional. I didn't necessarily do it on purpose. I didn't sit down and say, all right, I'm going to write Michael into the book. It was only later when I'd already written at least the first draft of Still Life. And I came down and I was feeling pretty proud of myself for having created this Gamache character. And Michael was sitting at the breakfast table and I was babbling away about, I don't know, hairstyles or, Gilligan's Island or something. And he was talking about world peace and shit. I didn't create Gamache. I transcribed the man. Yeah, he became the inspiration for Gamache. Had many of the same qualities. If you met Michael, as you did, Wendy, and then read the books, you wouldn't necessarily say, oh, physically, she's describing Gamache. But all of the things that matter, the interior, the core beliefs were Michael's. And then when he died, he got ill and died, I was afraid I wouldn't be able to write anymore, partly because of sadness. I didn't think I'd be able to breathe anymore. But also my Gamache is gone. But as it turned out, it's actually so comforting now to be able to write the books and be with Michael every day. It's like he's immortal now. And there's great comfort in that.
Louise, he was much older than you. And when you enter into a relationship with someone who's much older than you, you have to know there has to be that underlying sadness, I guess, or resignation that you will outlive them. Was that the case with you?
It's interesting you know that. Have you had that experience or how did you?
Oh, hell no. My husband's younger. Not much younger, but no. But I have friends who married older people and knowing that it will be a shorter relationship.
Yeah, no, that's one of the things I wish I could have changed is that anticipatory grief that was there all the time. When I blew out birthday candles, my only wish was that I go first, knowing that I probably wouldn't. And then when he got ill, I would wish that I wouldn't go first because if I did, it would be a disaster. But yeah, that was the fear. And I tried to prepare myself. But yeah, there was always this kind of call of fear hanging over me. And I was very aware of how lucky I was and how much I loved him. I wasn't a perfect relationship. Nothing is. And I tried to be grateful and aware of that. But I was always, every time he was out of my sight, I would have made a terrible mother. Oh my God, I would have chained them in the basement and never let them out. But whenever he was out of my sight, I was always worried that he'd never come back. And this went on for like 20 years of this. Poor man.
It's one thing that keeps coming up with you, and I think it's really central to you. And I like any guest, I researched you, and there was a couple of articles, and you were saying that there's always the same theme in your book, the sort of yearning to belong, and the Seamus Heaney quote that when Salman Rushdie was attacked, you brought out too, which is "Don't be afraid." And it's the same thing that was so funny what you were saying about that stupid bike trip that you and I and a bunch of girlfriends did up to north of Huntsville. Was that our mothers were kind of embraced risk. So maybe there's a line between don't be afraid and accept risk. There's probably a sensible person could find a line. But I think that's a big part of you is that, you might live with fear, but you believe in being brave.
I did live with fear for years, and it's such a thief. It narrows the life until my day became doing the least fearful thing possible. And then it led me to drink, to numb that so that I had the courage to do what had to be done, the minimum in life. And we can get into that later if you want. What it does allow me to do, though, is own that and write about what it feels like to be afraid. And fear comes out again, in so many different ways. It can come out in jealousy. It can come out in low self-esteem. It comes out in physical fear. I realize as I get older, when I was young, I was almost completely physically fearless. I went parachuting. We did that stupid bike trip. I did all sorts of things. But emotionally so bound up. So I was so afraid. I remember going on a date once. This was so embarrassing. And then the poor guy, he said, now, Like, what's your favorite? Like, by now, we're 30 seconds into the date. We're already talking about TV shows. And I remember saying to him, I'm afraid that's too personal. I don't want to tell you.
About your TV show?
I know. And I remember turning to him. It seemed like a reasonable response until I turned to him and saw the look of horror on his face.
So you never told him?
I never told him. Yeah, no. It's so I was emotionally just so guarded, unbelievably guarded.
What's your favorite color?
Don't ask. Don't ask.
As I got older and then got sober and worked on myself, I've become more physically, not necessarily fearful, but certainly cautious, but much more emotionally brave. And I've realized that it's not so much for me less fear, although I hope there's less of that, less fear. It really is about more courage. And that's what I've tried to work on, is just be brave, be brave. Yeah, you're afraid, but do it anyway. Do it anyway. What's the worst that can happen? It's even sometimes it's, when I was afraid of flying, the worst in my mind was, crashing. But the worst that can happen is never getting on a plane and never seeing these other places, never going to weddings and funerals and visiting other countries. That's the worst that can happen, is leading a tiny, tiny life.
Yeah. Fear is the worst. It really is. When we call it anxiety now, but it's the same thing, isn't it? Just this terror of doing something that may not work out unless you what's the worst that can happen? It's probably nothing near as bad as you think it would be, whatever it's going to be. Bringing the conversation back to the two of you, because I'm a little fascinated, a little jelly. Why did you break up? Can we talk about that?
Yeah. Do you want to go, Wendy, or do you want me to?
Yeah, no, you go, because I've confessed my regrets. You're probably one of my biggest regrets in life. So I've confessed that to you, but I've never heard your side of the story. So I would love to hear that.
Well, when Wendy and I, again, we're 15, 16, 14, whatever, and we have crushes on guys. And I always had crushes on my brother's friends. My brother is 18 months older than me, Rob. So I thought that they were just the best in the world. And one was a guy named Kim Forgy. And Wendy, who did you have a crush on at the time? Can you remember?
I just had crushes on everybody who was older, but I do remember, I knew that you liked Kim Forgy and I shouldn't have liked him, but I did. I remember staring at photos. I don't know whether it was the weightlifting club or whatever. Anyway, it was the shot in the yearbook and their tops were all exposed. And it was before six packs, but I was just like, oh my God, they're so fit and so muscled. So I had crushes on a bunch of people, but mostly like when you're 16, it's like anybody who's 2 years older, 18 months older, like they're like walking gods. So it was, I didn't have an older brother, but everybody's older brother was hot.
Well, in fact, you went to one of the proms with my brother, Rob. We found a photograph of that recently. I should send it to you, Maureen. It's actually quite flattering until you look at Wendy's shoes.
Oh, no, we have to get this. We will. Please send it to me.
I'm wearing a velvet dress and what looks to be running shoes.
Oh, God. Well, it was a difficult time. But back to Kim Forgy. What happened?
Well, what happened was Wendy came up to our country place for a couple of weeks or so, and we had the regatta and we had the regatta dance, and you get all dressed up, and Kim Forgy happened to be there, and he must have been visiting with Rob, and Wendy and Kim hooked up, and I'm standing there at the dance looking at my best friend thinking, what the fuck? And just being devastated because there goes my fantasy with Kim, and my best friend has just betrayed me. And then it was very awkward because not only was she staying with me, we were staying in the same bedroom. So I went, we got back home and I'm in tears and then I tell my parents and then we arranged for you to go home, didn't we, Wendy? I think we put you on the side of the road and with a bicycle or something.
Not quite, but.
You were taken out on a rail or whatever. You were vanished.
Yeah, no, it was, it's inexcusable. I say that I have two regrets in my life. And one of them I forgive myself for because it was so stupid and everybody did it. And that was smoking. And I smoked, which was really stupid. But the Kim Forgy thing, it was a betrayal. Like I've done other stupid things in my life, but to betray your best friend, even now, like people are like, oh, you're 15 or 16 or whatever. Like, yeah, I forgive you. And no. I've never done anything like that since, ever.
Just listen to this. I'm so sympathetic to the two reactions. One would be, is that it? That's it? And then the other side is, oh my God, I know exactly when you're that age and that happens, that is the worst thing that could ever happen.
To be fair, Wendy, you did try to make it up. I remember a number of times in class where you'd come up to me and try, and I just wasn't interested in re-engaging with you. But I do remember that you tried. And then we reconnect. We obviously didn't speak for a long time. Interestingly enough, of course, Wendy went into journalism and had this fantastic career.
You went into journalism.
I went into journalism and had a moderate. I did the 1 o'clock time signal.
You did more than that.
And Wendy was hosting the national, so it was about equal.
Same thing.
Now I'm still with jealousy, right?
We both went to Ryerson and we both ended up working for CBC. We both ended up working in Quebec City, not at the same time. But it was weird. And we can move on to that in a second, but I just have a very funny Kim Forgy story to tell because we're all over that, even though we're not over that, obviously.
I hope he subscribes to this podcast because he's getting more airtime than anybody. All right, let's hear your Kim Forgy story.
When I was in Ottawa, he was on the front cover of the Ottawa Citizen because I should look this up, but it was either quintuplets or sextuplets.
He fathered multiple babies?
Yes. So they're probably 100 now, but.
Oh my God, this guy. Seriously.
Kim, if you're listening, get in touch. Both of us.
No, don't.
I honestly feel nothing at all. And it really was a long time ago. I feel nothing at all, but for him, and I feel a lot for you. Positive, not negative. Wendy.
You know, it's funny. This guy gets two incredibly amazing young women crushing on him and then fathers sextuples. If he walked into the room, do the flowers bloom? I mean,
well, maybe in the photo in the yearbook, like 50 years ago, but.
I'd love to see him now. But yeah, then we reconnected. So after we went.
Well, you did it.
But why? What made you decide to put all that 35 years later, if I'm not mistaken?
Well, Wendy had just been diagnosed. I think you were in treatment, weren't you? You were in chemo for the breast cancer. And I remember sitting at the computer thinking, I want to get in touch, but I don't know. And should I or shouldn't I? And I just wrote, I can't even remember what I wrote. Just, dear Wendy, thinking of you, hope everything's okay. Hope you remember me, Louise, and sent it into the ether, like at contact CBC. I mean, just some anonymous thing. And I swear within 5 minutes, maybe even less, you responded.
Yeah. Oh, I was so happy to see you. Well, and you had just published your first book. Like there had been so much, I don't know, water under the bridge, as they say, over the years, and us sort of going in similar situations. And you almost drank yourself to death. You went through horrible, horrible, horrible things. And then by the time you reached out to me, you were with Michael. And you were loved, and your book, finally, your first murder mystery, the first of the Gamache series, had won an award in the UK after being turned down by all the Canadian publishers.
No, that's right. And then you came, we visited, you came in with Liam and Kate.
Husband and daughter, yeah.
To our place here in Quebec. And they were outside playing or doing whatever they were doing. And you came into the kitchen where I was getting the Dream Whip on the crackers.
You're such a good cook.
And you apologized then. And I've never forgotten that because I just think that is such an act of character that speaks so much to your character for apologizing 40 years later for this transgression. And you didn't have to because it was clear at that stage that we had both moved on and we were reconnecting. So you didn't have to do that, and you did it. And I've never forgotten the courage that takes. I mean, we talked about Noli to Mary, be not afraid. That took a lot of courage.
Well, I was stupid to have lost all those years and to have not been there when you were in trouble. And anyway, you just mean a lot to me.
I love you.
I love you. And I wish that I had gotten in touch with you instead of vice versa. I mean, you're just a bigger person.
That is true.
The women of ill repute.
And anyway, and now you're like famous. How many bazillion million followers do you have?
Oh, not that many, because I'm not really on social media.
Yeah, you're known like Margaret Atwood.
She actually reads the books. I did an event with her and I said, because they were just beginning, it's actually going to be on Prime, the Three Pines series. They were casting it at the time. And I said to Margaret, how would you feel about being Ruth in the TV show? Because I said, you act, you do a little bit of acting. She said, I would love to. Can you imagine if Margaret Atwood was cast as Ruth? So I got in touch with the producers and I said, yeah, well, whatever. I mean, and for me, it's like my head's on fire. How can you not pursue that?
Let me ask you about the Three Pines series. And you live in the Eastern Townships where the series is set. Do people stop you or call you up or does your neighbors say, hey, is that me? Like, do you ever get people saying, I can tell that's me or that's my daughter or anything like that?
Well, the funny thing is nobody ever thinks they're Ruth. Everybody thinks they're Gamache or Clara or one of the others. And the fact is, I actually do. I don't know of a single artist who doesn't pull from their life experience. So yes, whether it's taking characteristics or some physical characteristics or events. So yeah, it's almost like Dr. Frankenstein taking bits and pieces from everything around and fashioning together these characters. But yeah, they are definitely inspired. Mostly they're inspired by, we talk about that yearning to belong. They're really inspired by what's invisible, what can't be seen. And that's that sense of belonging, the genuine belief that goodness exists and that kindness will always trump cruelty. Maybe not in the short term, but in the long term, if you can hold on to kindness and decency and integrity, it will win.
So I remember when I saw you recently, you said, sure, I'll come on your podcast. Whatever I don't want to answer, I'll just not answer. I'm a big girl. And then you said, but am I really a woman of ill repute? So Maureen and I talked about that. And it just keeps changing. What is a woman of ill repute? Because I think most women that we've reached out to have gone, yeah, I'm a woman of ill repute. Just don't call me that. So to me, I don't know whether you see yourself as that, because you are a very good, decent person who writes about mostly good, decent people, except for the people who kill people. But to me, a woman of ill repute is somebody who says, I don't care what the rules are. I'm going to be brave. And if the rules fit, great. And if they don't fit, I'm going to do that anyway. So to me, you're a woman of ill repute, but you're also a goddess and an angel stuff. So
the nice thing is, it's like witches, right? I mean, how we're reclaiming the idea of a witch. Yes, I'm a witch. I am witch. I am happy to say I am a witch. I mean, I have done, the ceremonies or whatever, smudging and doing all of that. But a witch is only a wise woman. That's all. And a brave woman and someone who knows things that others may not and who claims her power. And that's, so yes, I'm a witch. And that, I guess that also makes me a woman of ill repute.
Welcome to the club.
Yeah, absolutely. That's well expressed. That's better than we've been able to come up with in the last 6 months. That analogy is absolutely right. It's a compliment at the end of the day. When Wendy and I were talking about who to have on this podcast, apart from Sharon Stone and Jane Fonda, who Wendy thought were going to be banging on the door, we really struggled with trying to figure out how to explain this. And we worried that we would actually, by asking people to be on this podcast called Women of Ill Repute, that they would be insulted. And then we came to the conclusion that if they were insulted by that, then we didn't want to have them on in the first place, right?
It is so interesting what you say, because you've both done it too. And I think I have too, is as a woman saying, standing up and saying, attention must be paid. I can see you. I am not afraid of you. And I'm going to do what I need to do, within the realm of trying not to hurt other people. But that's, there's wide margin there. I am just, this train is leaving. Get on it if you want. Get out of the way.
Yeah. And I think some people deserve to be hurt. Like when I was on Marketplace, we would spend 6 weeks investigating people who had hurt other people, and then we'd go and be mean to them. So that's fine, because they deserved it. But I don't think most people do deserve it. I mean, I don't think you do want to hurt people, but you also want to be true. And I just find that the whole idea, we're not going to debate truth here, but I think the struggle for truth is really important. And your books read true. So how much can you tell us about Hillary Clinton? I've been dying to hear about Hillary. Yeah. So what was that like? You wrote a book with her.
I was just going to say that's a natural segue right there.
Well, that's an interesting question. the fact is, I mean, I'm there because I'm a writer, and she's there because of her geopolitical insider knowledge. So we each brought something different to the project. And yeah, for the most part, I wrote it, sent the pages off to her. She would send them back. Longhand, it was so annoying. And with like changes, any change, and then we'd talk about, this probably, what do you think of this character? And I'm worried about this. The book could not have been written without Hilary. But, to think that she was sitting there for 6 hours a day writing just isn't the truth. But neither could I have written that book alone. So it was actually in many ways a perfect partnership.
And then you went on a speaking tour. You were you did all like the TV shows in English around the world. Like you were like two famous girls.
It was terrifying. And the thing is, when we were in London, we were doing all the big shows in London. And for some reason, I only brought one pair of shoes. And the first show, I get off the elevator, I think it was at the BBC, and my shoe, the sole of my shoe hits the elevator shaft thing and rips off. So now it's like a clown shoe, right? I've got one normal shoe, and the other is like it's got a mouth opening. Every time I take a step, it's opening and slapping. And so then, of course, the first one, they introduce us and we have to walk across a stage.
Flap, flap, flap.
Flap in the shoe, or I get to drag it like Quasimodo. So make a choice. What's the worst? Everybody is, of course, focused on Hilary, and I am the skin tag attached. It was quite an experience. And Hilary was very aware of the imbalance and was very gracious and generous to always make sure that I was included, to turn to me and say, well, Louise, why don't you answer that question? And I was very grateful for that, because it really would have been easy for me to have been just swallowed up by the machine that goes with being former Secretary of State.
Are you happy about that casting, Louise? I guess you wouldn't say if you weren't.
And now you're doing this, not you're doing, but your books have been turned into a Netflix series with Alfred Molina. What's that been like?
Yes, and it's actually going to be Prime. It's the Amazon Prime, not Netflix, yeah. So often my ego agrees to something that the rest of me has to follow through on. And I think this was one of those. I had an adaptation done of the first book, which was done by CBC, and I was not pleased with it. So I decided I would never do this again. So I turned down every offer until the people who made The Crown approached me, Left Bank, and said, British. And I felt very strongly initially that a Canadian had to make it. So that's why I agreed to this other production. And clearly that wasn't a fit. It took us 2 years of negotiating about, who would be doing what and my influence and my role and what the contract would look like. They had to shoot it here in Quebec. They had to use a certain number of Quebec actors and production people. I think all of that is understood anyway, because as you know, there are grants given by the government, but you have to hire so many Canadians to do it. So I thought I had written in enough power for myself to have significant influence. Turns out I did not. So, oh my goodness. They came here. They were wonderful. I met with the writer many times, and they made choices I would never have made. They made some wonderful ones. I think Alfred Molina as Gamache, and I've seen the first couple of episodes, is superb. But there are other choices that I would never have made, and they know it. And, we've gone back and forth on that, but ultimately they win. So I don't know how I feel. I wish at this point I hadn't agreed to it, but it may end up being the right thing. And it may be, I have to sit myself down and say, how much of this is just I'm feeling hyper ownership of this? And that if I agree to this, I have to allow them to create their version of my stories and to let it go and to be okay with it. I don't know how much of this is just my own insecurities.
Well, we're all control freaks, like all three of us. It's really hard to, here's my baby, do what you want with it. No.
Right. And I feel, without trying to sound too precious, but these characters have given me a life that I never thought I would have. I mean, it's just fantastic. And I owe them, what I owe them in return is when I write decent books for them, but also protection. And I don't think I protected them enough twice. So there won't be a third time.
That's really interesting. I think about, your pal, Margaret Atwood, with The Handmaid's Tale, which was the first season was true to and then it just took off into this sort of vengeance
I thought about it because I have friends whose works have been adapted and they're very happy, even though they have taken, they have to make choices, the film and TV people. And I wonder why I'm feeling just so stressed about it. And I think partly it's what you were saying, Wendy, that's just part of my makeup and probably all of ours, and perhaps why we are as successful as we have been, because we care so much. But, I also think it's because I only do one thing. It's not like I write 2 or 3 series or I have this and then I have, other interests elsewhere. I don't. I've spent 20 years creating this world that hasn't been created because it's a marketing tool. It's been created out of something profound in me. All the characters, all the themes, all the things that I explore, things that I care deeply about. And I think that's why it's difficult for me to just hand it over to someone else and allow their life to influence what they do.
You did the collaboration with Hillary Clinton, but do you, in fact, have other worlds you want to create / explore?
Yeah, I think I have other ideas. To be fair, I really like writing the Gamache books, and I find the characters endlessly fascinating. And they are very proudly crime novels. But that's really the alpha. It's not the omega. It's the Trojan horse that allows all sorts of other things to be explored within the books, all these other themes. So it's endless what I can do with these characters and characters whose company I enjoy. And through the pandemic, I was never lonely because I had this rich imaginary life of Three Pines. I could always go to the bistro and hang out with the folks there. My mother always said, getting me out of the bedroom, that having, reading so much and having such an imaginary friends, isn't going to get you anywhere. Well, yeah.
Madness of Crowds, which was written about the pandemic, which I think you said you changed it halfway through. That was the book that came out just before the Hillary book or just around the same time. I love that book. And maybe it was because it sort of intersected with a lot of sort of political, like I'm a journalist, so I like facts instead of deep thoughts and feelings. But it was it was the idea that I think that we're all struggling with right now, which is that there's a lot of stuff floating around that presented as fact that's not fact. And that people are spinning people's minds and people aren't, and you told it as fiction, which I thought it was fantastic.
Thank you. And what happens when you get a convincing character who is charismatic and what they can say? And the fact is, most of what they say, there is, and what makes it so dangerous, is a grain of truth in what it is they are saying. And then they make it into something grotesque. So yeah, no, it was really interesting. I wasn't going to write about the pandemic. And in that book, the pandemic is in the past. I didn't want to write about something we were still going through because it was bad enough. And I didn't think anyone wanted to read about the pandemic. And I didn't know when I was writing it that it would essentially be over, that we would have vaccines. But I did feel that I couldn't just let it go. And that idea that an idea is a virus. And so there was that parallel between what happened in the pandemic and then this sort of pandemic of a horrific idea.
Only there's no vaccine. Do you have a vaccine? Wouldn't that be great? A truth vaccine.
No, I know. And we're looking at, I don't even want to mention her name, but I've been reading about someone who's popped up in Canada who is similar as well. And I thought about the madness of crowds and thought, nobody is immune.
So, Maureen, did you have any more questions? This is your one big chance to figure out secrets between me and Louise.
I love listening to this and taking part in it, but I'm Louise, you're very compelling to the point where I'm not thinking of my next question. Actually listening to you. That is a good sign. But yeah, I think we probably have to wrap this up, although I feel like we could do a series. There's so many places we could go to.
I'm so impressed with the two of you. I remember, Wendy, you came last winter and you were sitting, I'm pointing to the living room where you were sitting in the chair and I was on the sofa and it was snowing outside. And you were staying the night and you told me about Maureen and about this podcast, and you two were just trying to figure out what it was, but you had the name women of ill repute. And so it was fascinating to hear you talk about it and then to see now this success. In fact, Jamie Broadhurst, who's my Canadian distributor / publisher out west at Raincoast, is a big fan. He tunes in now to Women of Ill Repute and loves it and loves the two of you.
Hi, Jamie. Tell your friends. Yeah, well, we're having a blast.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And the people you were getting on, how wonderful. What a variety.
Well, I mean, they are in good company with you. We've been very lucky. We know a few people and they know a few people. And, maybe one day, share. Can't promise, but maybe.
And Hillary, you got to hook us up with Hillary. Although she's got a podcast now too, which is, yeah. So you don't listen to any podcasts. You're probably just a reader.
No, well, I work out now. So, and have through the pandemic, although you wouldn't know, because as I work out, the only thing in my head is cake.
How many cakes do I get after a workout? Half an hour equals 1 slice.
I'm looking at the bike thing, right? It says, 5 calories, 6 calories. I think, how many bites? That's probably not even a bite yet.
Louise Penny, such a pleasure to meet you. Thank you for coming on. And I hope we meet in person one day because I can see why Wendy loves you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. This has been so much fun, the two of you, but Wendy loves me more.
She's no any longer. Thank you, Louise.
Love you, Louise.
So she wasn't what I thought. I mean, you've talked a lot about Louise and, you're so proud of her and you love her so much. But you've also said she's a bit of lives in the woods and doesn't suffer fools. So I was scared. You know how it is when you triangulate friends, like when you have two friends whom you love and then you put them together and you think you're all going to love each other the same. And it doesn't usually happen, but she's just so warm and she adores you and she's so interesting. So thanks for bringing Louise onto the show.
Yeah, she's a real teddy bear. I mean, like all of us, she's got, like places that hurt and, she's got things have happened in her life. Like when she almost killed herself and I wasn't there. When I said she almost drank herself to death, she almost drank herself to death because that whole fear thing that she has now got reflected in her books and is dealing with and is loving herself to, I hope, to some strong degree. That wasn't happening 20 years ago. And we were talking. And so I find that really hard that like she was there for me when I had cancer. And anyway, but we're obviously really good friends. And I'm glad you really liked her because she's funny.
She is. She's funny and she's warm and engaging and brilliant. I didn't want to ask her because we were talking about deeper things, but she's got she's like a perfume bottle. London, Paris, New York. She's got places in all those places. Like she's living a fabulous life, as she admits.
Yeah, she went from basically a crappy apartment curled up in a fetal position to being feted on all of the TV networks and living a fabulous life with lots of money. I mean, no one ever has enough money, it seems, but I'm sure she needs 5 more homes.
But I bet she traded all in for another year with Michael.
Yeah, he was a really cool guy and he was so supportive of her. And even when his kids were like, what are you doing with her? She's a gold digger, because he was from a very wealthy family in Montreal. And Louise was not a famous writer. She was somebody who had struggled with alcoholism and fallen in love with him. And his kids were like, what are you doing with her? And he was like, I love her and she loves me and we're supporting you. You need to get your heads around this. And so, they worked through that, but it was difficult. It's funny. She was writing something about, I think she wrote to you yesterday when you confirmed sending the Squadcast thing, the Zoom-like thing that we record everybody on, saying that I was so popular in high school. But, high school's high school. And it's just a blip. And the only person other than my boyfriend who had a lot of issues, my high school boyfriend and whatever, other than him, I haven't been in touch with anybody other than Louise. Like, 'cause high school to me it was something that if you could survive it, if you could do well, great. And then next, because it just, I don't know, wasn't my world except for Louise.
All right. Well, that wraps that episode. And Louise Penny. She's just a fabulous person and an amazing author. And I just picked up her books because of this. And I'm glad I did. And I'm glad I met her. And I'm glad I know you.
Yeah, I'm glad I know you too. Even if we don't go back to grade 9. So yeah, we can say goodbye. We'll talk again, I'm sure.
You know what's great about doing this podcast with you? And maybe not so great for the listeners, that we just don't know when to stop. Okay, let's stop now.
The Women of Ill Repute with Wendy Mesley and Maureen Holloway. Available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or at womenofillrepute.com.
Produced and distributed by the Sound Off Media Company.